Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Last month, I started the SJS Direct Fantasy Flashback Fall book campaign. And as part of the SJS Direct Fantasy Flashback Fall book campaign, I was going to launch titles that gave readers a look into characters' histories in the SJS Direct universe while teaching some lessons in African American history. And the first book that was part of Fantasy Flashback Fall, Eastine, The Sands of Time, was designed to give you a look at Eastine's past as a princess in ancient Egypt while teaching a story about life in ancient Egypt as Eastine went to help the time-displaced John Haynes find his way back home to his time in the 1980s. Now, the second book in Fantasy Flashback Fall has a far more serious tone than Eastine, The Sands of Time, which was designed to be like a Disney princess movie. The second story that is a part of SJS Direct Fantasy Flashback Fall, it has a far more serious tone, and that story is Isis, Imitation of Life. Now, Isis, Imitation of Life was partially inspired by the 1934 cinematic film Imitation of Life, which detailed the differences between life for white women and black women. And it was also inspired by the golden age of comics and pulp fiction, which featured characters like Doc Savage and The Shadow. And with Isis, Imitation of Life, I wanted to tell a story of what made a person a hero in the black community during the golden age of comics and showed how we saw heroes during that golden age of comics. Now, during the golden age of comic books and pulp fiction, we often saw white heroes like Doc Savage, The Shadow, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Alan Scott's Green Lantern going on to have these great and fantastic adventures either in between the pages of pulp fiction, like the ones Doc Savage and The Shadow were featured in, or comic books like the ones that Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Golden Age Flash, and the Golden Age Green Lantern were featured in. And sadly, during this era, we did not get to see many black heroes during the golden age of comic books, and the ones that we did see were oftentimes coons like the whitewash character that was featured in the Young Allies comics. And what I wanted to do with Isis, Imitation of Life was show you what black people were doing during this era and what we did as heroes in this era where black people were dealing with the threat of Jim Crow in the South and discrimination in the North. Because with the Isis character, I wanted to show that what we did for heroics was not having these fantastic adventures, but we were having heroes who were being the boots on the ground, laying the foundation for the civil rights movement that was to come. And as part of laying that foundation, what black people were doing was fighting against Jim Crow by showing that they could live and be respectable, responsible people. And that was one of the things a lot of black people went out of their way to do as they were being bombarded with numerous racist images in media and numerous racist stereotypes that were being promoted in movies like Imitation of Life. And what I wanted to show in Isis, Imitation of Life was the work Isis was doing on the ground as she was laying the foundation for the work that others would take on. And what Isis was doing is related to an old African proverb, which states that a race can rise no higher than the moral position of its women. And as the woman goes, so goes the race. So, what Isis was doing as a professor at Spelman College was creating a sorority called the Thetas. And as part of the Thetas, what she was trying to do was create the sorority where these young women would get a lesson in having a strong moral position. And with that sororities teaching that culture to those women, they could go on to teach their children. So that was the foundation of the Theta sorority that she created, which was what we had happen in the 1930s. We had a lot of black sororities and a lot of black organizations that were created to create a dignified and sophisticated image of black women to counter the numerous stereotypes that were being promoted in media, like the Mammies, like the Jezebels, and like the Sapphires that were designed to create negative images of black women. And that was another thing that was important to me in this story, showing you how humanized black women were during this 1930s era of Jim Crow, and why they stood up and wanted to make this image out here of themselves, because the media wanted to present this negative image of black people in media. So Isis was fighting a different battle than your Supermans and your Batmans, and that battle was against racism and Jim Crow. And as her fight was not against white people, it was trying to educate and teach black people to value themselves, see a worth in themselves, and see a value in being black and being proud of being black. So that was Isis's mission during the golden age of comic books, the golden age of superheroes. She was being a hero to people in the black community, not taking on these so-called supervillains, but taking on the ideas and culture of white supremacy and racism. And it's a really tough fight against white supremacy and racism, because it's something that is all ingrained in American culture, and it's often harder to get people to see a value in black when they're told that the white man's ice is colder and that white people have a higher value than black people. And this is one of the cruxes of the Imitation of Life story, is that the goddess wants to teach this black girl her value of self, but she has to deal with the struggles of self-hatred and issues that this girl has, because that's what the Theta sorority is all about, trying to educate young black girls in finding value in self, finding worth in self, and many of the principles of things like Marcus Garvey talked about regarding self-determination and self-empowerment. So Isis had a philosophy she wanted to teach, and that was what made her a hero during the Golden Age. And this is something that runs in contrast to the superheroes in comic books, who often wore these fancy costumes and took on a rogues gallery. Isis's fight was a completely different one, and I believe that a black hero's fight during the Golden Age of comics would be a very different battle, because they would not only be fighting racism against white people, but they would be fighting against ideas and ideologies that black people have learned and imbibed ever since the days of slavery and during the Emancipation Proclamation, where a lot of black people, while they got their physical freedom, did not have their mental freedom. And this was a story where I wanted to show how our battles during this era of what many people call the Golden Age of comics would be completely different, and what would make a hero during the Golden Age of comics in the black community be very different. Because during this era, what we considered a hero were many of the young black professionals, like the teachers, the doctors, the lawyers, the people who made up the black middle class, and many of the black business owners who built businesses, who allowed many black people who got college educations to work using the degrees they struggled and scraped and saved to get, instead of having to work as a Pullman porter, a maid, or a janitor. Because in many white businesses, this was the only job a black person was able to have, working at a white business. But at a black owned business, a black man or a black woman could be the professional they went out here and aspired to be. And I wanted to show the value of black owned businesses in this story. I wanted to show the black community as it was during that time. And I did a lot of extensive research to make the best book possible, showing you what it was like for black people during the time of Jim Crow. Now, many stories I've read and movies I've watched regarding the Jim Crow period, oftentimes all they show you is the white racist and how the white racists saw black people. But with ISIS Imitation of Life, I wanted to show you a very different story, how black people weren't living an imitation of a white person's life, but how they were living life to the fullest. And in this story, I wanted you to see all of the black professionals who owned black owned businesses, black communities, and black towns. And I wanted to show you what black life was like, even during those hard times, how black people persevered and managed to actually work towards having something, and how they wanted to make efforts to preserve all that they worked for. And I wanted to show you that, as related to the black community, this was a completely different era, and I wanted to show you how the story of the black community really was not being told. Because when you look at a lot of media out here, again, all they show you are evil white people, evil Klansmen, and they don't show black achievement, black empowerment. And with ISIS Imitation of Life, I really want to show you a picture of black achievement and black empowerment during one of the darkest periods in American history. Because if it wasn't for those people during that era being heroes, we would not have the black America we have today. And with this story, I wanted to pay respect to all of those black people who struggled and sacrificed for us to be here today. And I also wanted to pay a tribute to those people, because just like those golden age superheroes laid the foundation for the modern day comic book industry, with this story I wanted to make a statement how those black people of that great generation laid the foundation for black people to have the freedom that they enjoy today, the opportunities they enjoy today, and the ability to move their lives forward today. Because a lot of people, they don't want to look at the past regarding the Jim Crow period and see the positives in it. But when I look at the Jim Crow period, I saw a lot of black achievement, a lot of black accomplishment, a lot of black empowerment, and I wanted to shine a spotlight on those positive achievements and accomplishments, because these, again, heroes were oftentimes the first in their family to go to college. They were the first in their family to have a career. They were the first in their families to start businesses. And they were the first in their families to actually go out and have a legacy. And I wanted to honor that legacy with ISIS Imitation of Life. And I wanted to honor those people for making all of those sacrifices for brothers like me and sisters out there to go out here and be able to live freely in this country, because if it wasn't for those everyday people going out here and showing that they had dignity and stood up for themselves, we wouldn't have the black community we have today. And this is why I am urging everyone to go out and read Isis Imitation of Life, because I wanted to show that our life in the black community is not an imitation, it's the real thing. It's something we created ourselves, it's something that has value, and it's something we need to appreciate. With this story, again, I wanted to not only pay tribute to those golden age superheroes that were a part of comic books, but I wanted to show what made a person a hero in the black community. And during that era, we never got to see any black heroes, but I wanted to shine a spotlight on what we saw as heroic in our community and what was important to us during one of the darkest periods in American history. You can pick up a copy of Isis Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read Isis Imitation of Life for free. This is a great story, and I urge everyone who loves black people and loves black history to pick up this story, because I go out of my way to really make a tribute to all of those black men and women who fought and sacrificed before the era of the civil rights movement. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.